You need a split washer, right?
Yeah, I do.
What do you like on one?
Welcome to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoatings. This episode of Sam's Garage, Sam and Kevin Ford modify the Jeep's hood to get more air down into the engine. Sam and Doug Harris assemble the complete long block engine in the Alpha 1 GTO. Bob Douglas stops by to assist with installing new rod ends on Sam's personal car. Then Sam shows us a simple way to add more horsepower to your vehicle in just a few minutes. Since the Jeep will be crawling over rocks instead of speeding down the track, it's important to make sure that the engine still gets plenty of air. Sam and Kevin modify the hood with new scoops to allow fresh air to get down into the engine bay. This will help make sure that the Jeep's engine stays nice and cool while off-roading on the trails.
You know, producing the kind of heat that we're going to be doing on this rock crawler, we're going to need to vent the hood. And Kevin brought us some beautiful pieces that he's made at Lokar. These are nice.
Yeah, we actually created these for our Camaro that we built several years ago for a look standpoint, and then we were going to make them function as the actual intake. But in our case, we're going to make them exhaust the air.
Absolutely, because anytime you have a custom build like we have, engine swap, high horsepower, but in our case, really, the important thing is we're going to be idling a lot. Fan's going to be running, and so we got to dissipate the heat out of the engine bay. These are going to work great.
The way these are designed, we can lay them out on the hood, we can trace the inside of this flange. If you look, this is actually a clamshell feature, so the only thing that's going to stick up is this little 1/4 inch above, and then the rest of this is going to be below. So if you have any ripples in the hood, when you clamp it, they'll smooth out. Yeah, and you can hide any little mistakes you make cutting.
I'm excited to see how well they're going to dissipate the heat from the engine bay.
Yeah, and they're going to look great too, because it's streamlined. They're large, so we're going to get a lot of volume through them.
Biggest things are original. How many Jeeps do you see with these on there?
That's right.
You know, that looks a lot different installed than when you're just mocking it up.
Right? I mean, you've got that thick piece on the top. It's hard to really picture what it's going to look like, but it came out awesome.
Absolutely beautiful. And you guys, when you're doing something like this, if this was a finished hood, you want to, once you scribe your lines, put a piece of tape there so that you don't flake the paint that you're cutting on.
That's right, and when you're done, you're going to want to paint that edge just so you don't get any rust or anything like
Correct.
that.
Today's hood's mostly aluminum though. And you want to deburr it. You want to use a deburring tool, or you can use a different pad on your grinder and get all that metal out from both sides. Usually the metal's going to be on the back side. Get it out of there so that it's nice and finished. Now this hood's going to get finished, so we're going to remove all this. When we finally install it, what are we going to do with those bolts?
We're going to put some Loctite on there. We want to make sure they don't fall in the engine.
Absolutely. Now let's go ahead and put it on. You know, anytime you can do a modification where it's both aesthetic and functional, it's a huge plus.
Yeah, I mean, these came out awesome, and I'm really excited about how functional I show people that they are, not just a pretty little flare to the Jeep.
And if you wanted to, if you're really worried about any kind of water getting in on a rainy day, you could take the time to put a piece of sheet metal under there, put a hose, couple holes, and it'll have a regular drain.
Yeah, that's right. You could bring a trough down and drain it wherever you want. The awesome thing with these is we're done with the underside of it. We don't have to dress it up. I mean, if we open that, the nice ring that holds them in and clamps them, it finishes off really nice.
It really does. And if you guys are gonna powder coat these or paint these, remember, as tight as the fit as it is in there, don't get the edges. Or if you're powder coating them, put some tape in there before you spray the powder coat on there and put it in the oven so you don't get that material there.
Yeah, and we put a good little chamfer in there, but we want it to be as tight as we can. So when you're tightening that down, you don't have to kill it. You don't want to squeeze into the paint. You want to be cautious with that.
And it's very important, like you took all the time you needed to make sure that we centered these things up with measurements, put our lines in, scribed everything, and so we know that those are perfect. And this is where you better do it 2 or 3 times because it's going to be noticed, and that's expensive if you mess it up.
Yeah, and they're universal. They've got different angles. You know, we chose to align the back, angle them this way.
Yeah,
I mean,
go with the taper of the hood.
Yeah, and we had a variety of options, so take the time, lay it out, see what you like, test fit, and do that before you start cutting.
Absolutely, it looks really good. These things are nice, they look good, they installed pretty easily. The hardest part was really just cutting it and measuring it.
That's right.
Very nice pieces, thank you.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoating. Sam and Doug assemble the complete long block in the Alpha 1 GTO. In this phase, the cylinder heads are bolted to the engine block and torqued down to factory spec. With the heads in place, the valve train and timing components are then installed, completing the engine build.
You know, I did an awful lot of research before I decided to use this motor. This was my brother's engine, and having the ability to fit inside of this car and to do everything sentimentally means an awful lot to me. And the build has just come out absolutely spectacular. I'm really looking forward to getting in the car and feeling the horsepower and the torque this thing produces.
Me too. That's going to be totally cool. Now, as you can see, we've used ARP bolts everywhere that counts on this engine, and things don't change when you're tightening things like oil pan, timing covers, or valve covers. You always want to go from the middle out, spanning the metal out to the edges. And you want to make sure that you go back and torque everything twice, because when you're dealing with a rubber gasket, you're going to compress it. Then when you go back to the middle ones, the first few you tightened, it's going to be loose. So you got to go back through maybe 3 times.
Yeah, absolutely. And normally when I'm putting these things together, I'm really taking my time, because if you don't, you're more prone to have leaks. And if you take your time, you adjust it, you torque it a little bit, you come back, you torque it again, take a look at how you're doing it. When you get the engine done, you won't have any leaks.
Whenever you're putting on heads on a motor, you want to clean the deck and the bottom surface of the head. When you do that, you're going to get a little bit of lint no matter what rag you use. So you clean it off with a good brake cleaner, then you go in with Shop Air and get all the lint off so that when you put your heads on, it's nice and clean.
Another tech tip that you'll have is a long time, if you're getting ready to build a motor, it says check number 1, check for top dead center. You want to know which is number 1. The easiest way to do it when you're doing a V8, if I take a look at both of my heads, I have one head slightly in front of the other. The head that's the farthest forward, this would be number 1 cylinder. Interesting tech tip.
ARP head bolts are so strong that you can reuse them a few times. But after the second time, make sure to check it with a stretch dial indicator so that to make sure it's not stretching on you. Then you'll know whether to replace it or not.
It's real important when you're going ahead and you're setting up your valves that you make sure that your push rod lengths are correct. Because if they're not correct and you're loading one side, you're going to go ahead and wear out the valve guide. So you want uniform travel of this across the valve stem back and forth. So make sure it's always in the center.
You want to check it with a cylinder where the cam is on base circle, okay? Like for instance, this one right here.
Yeah, and when he's talking about the camshaft, he's talking about the base circle. If you look at any camshaft, the way it's designed, it's got a base circle and then it moves up a large hump, then it comes back to the base circle. It's that base circle that you want to make sure that that's in the neutral position, because then you're not opening the valve or closing the valve.
But if you don't know, you want to rotate the motor so you do know, so that you do your measurements correctly. When you put this push rod in, it's a little bit short. Rod sits like this, the rocker arm sits a little high, and when it goes to open, it's going to actually come off of the tip of the valve stem. So it's a good idea to take an adjustable push rod like I have here and adjust it, right? Then you can see exactly the geometry, make sure you can even put it in place, spin the motor, make sure it's riding in the middle of the valve stem, staying on top of the valve stem. Then you take your measurement with your push rod, order your push rods, then adjust your valves. So make sure you do this part right. Well, Doug, what do you think? That looks pretty good, huh?
Oh, it looks excellent.
It turned out nice. You know, being that it's a 347, it's going to make a lot of horsepower and torque in a small package that's going to fit nicely in that car. And we want to make sure the intake manifold that we use is going to give us a European flair.
Right, yeah, we're going to be looking at with a fuel injection system onto it, using throttle bodies, a Weber type setup, except it'll be fuel injection. We got to measure all of our heights, make sure everything fits correctly under the hood, use the right type of fuel management system onto it, but it's going to have a really sweet look for a 250 GTO running a Ford motor.
Now back to more Sam's Garage. Last week, Sam and Bob Douglas from Rod End Supply did some light maintenance on Sam's Infiniti. While Sam was getting his hands dirty changing the oil, Bob showed us some of the many products that Rod End Supply has to offer. Coming up, they both get to work on changing the rod ends in Sam's Infiniti. The new rod ends will help keep the suspension and alignment within the proper specs.
You ready to go do some arms?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Now I got all the jam nuts loose. We're going to go ahead and R&R the rods one at a time. Now you're probably wondering, why didn't I travel the suspension up to tighten that bolt? It's because the rod end turns in 360 degrees, so it's never going to bind, so you don't have to do that. Now you guys notice I'm using a chrome socket on an impact. There's nothing wrong with that. In certain cases, you do have to use chrome sockets. They're lifetime warranty. If they break, just replace them. There's nothing wrong with that. So I've already got one rod off, and I'm going to show you guys how to assemble the new rod, making sure that you really don't need an alignment, or at least you can get yourself to the alignment shop without killing the tires. There are two eccentrics for alignment adjustment. Anytime you remove an eccentric, you always want to mark where it was so that you put it back to where it was, and then therefore the alignment will be very close. You can drive it anywhere to an alignment shop. So I put marks on the four eccentrics, left and right, and then we can go ahead and address those. Now, as far as the rod goes, okay, you want to make sure that when you put the new rod in, it's the exact same length as the old one that you removed. And there's a really easy way to do that, and I'll show you exactly how. All right, so we're going to be changing out this rod, and we're going to make sure that the rods are going to be the same length as the rod that we removed. There is a washer that you have to transfer from the old rod to the new rod. We're going to put it right here between the jam nut and the rod itself. Now, this is the type of rod that you would make out in the field that's custom, correct? You would buy the rod, or you would make this out of stock. How would someone go about making something like this?
Well, first off, you have to start with the correct size piece of tubing, and then you may have to do a little drilling, and you'll have to tap it. So you'll tap a left hand on one side and a right hand on the other, so that way you can screw the components into it.
Very nice. It's going to make for a better ride. Now, when we're going to do this, we're going to take one of the bolts that we removed from the car, line up the bottom flanges, put the bolt through all holes. Okay. Same thing with the top. We're going to get it close. Take your two rods next to each other, put a bolt hole at the bottom, line up the bottom, take one of the bolts you removed from the car, put it into the bottom, going through both items. Okay, now you've got the bottom lined up. You can see the top has to be screwed in a little bit more. And you see that right there? We now have two rods the same size.
Yep, that'll do it.
Now what we
and
have
it's there.
is two rods the same length. And what this is going to do is make sure that you get to the alignment shop without killing your tires. This is very close. We're about 99%. Now, I do recommend you guys do a good final alignment, because any little small amount is going to give you a big adjustment on the car. So this is going to get us very close. It won't kill the tires getting to the alignment shop, all right? But you do want to go to the alignment shop and make sure that you are good. Now we can install this one and repeat the process on the other 5. That wasn't so bad, was it, Bob?
Wasn't too bad.
Not at all. 6 arms, record time.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoating. Are you interested in getting more horsepower from your vehicle? Sam has the answer from Hypertech. The Max Energy Spectrum Power Programmer will unlock the potential of your engine, adding more horsepower, torque, and overall performance. It installs quickly and easily, giving you more time behind the wheel instead of in the garage.
You guys ready to make some real horsepower without getting your hands dirty or even popping the hood? I've got this 2017 Ford Raptor 3.5 liter twin turbo. I've got the Hypertech Spectrum Programmer. Now this thing is known to make the most power per dollar over any tuner out there. 50 state, carb legal, and we all know Hypertech. They make the most reliable horsepower for the longest of any programmer out there. Now I've made a lot of horsepower over the years, and the numbers that we get from this Spectrum is so impressive that I can't believe it. Now you may have to wear glasses in this case. I'm gonna read you guys the horsepower rating. This is right off of their website. This is the dyno sheet. This thing's gonna make 131 horsepower on 93 octane gas. But if you guys are running 87 octane gas, you're gonna make 106 horsepower at the tires and 46 pounds of torque on 87 and 80 on 93. That's crazy. Usually it'll take like a supercharger on a normally aspirated motor to make those kinds of numbers, and you may not even reach them. So when you unbox the box, you're going to see that you have an update cable for your computer. There are cases where you do have to update the programmer before you install it. And then you'll have the OBD2 connector that plugs into the DLC of the vehicle. It's very easy. It takes about 15 minutes to do this entire install. Plug it into the unit, and just simply follow the instructions on the screen. You can't mess this up. We're going to turn the truck to the on position and basically follow the instructions. Now, this is a full color display. This is able to adjust your tire size, your differential, your fan speed, your idle speed, your top speed limiter, your shift points. Even if your truck or vehicle has start-stop technology, you can turn that off. And that's a great idea because it kills your starter and it puts a strain on your battery. Now, if you guys feel that your battery is a little bit weak, maybe not up to par, go ahead and put a charger on it just to be safe. And when you're installing the Max Energy, it takes up to 10 minutes. You don't want to walk away from the vehicle. It's going to ask you a few times to turn on and off the ignition and hit OK, so don't walk away from it. Custom tuning is like I just said. You're going to go in there and you're going to make those parameters right for what you want to do. If you have a stock Raptor, you just may leave those alone. But if you have a stock Raptor and you do nothing else, I do recommend changing out the thermostat to a lower temperature thermostat. Then you can go in here and reduce your fan speed, keeping that P0128 code off. All right? So now let's go ahead and install it. All right, there we go, we're all installed. Now it's time to go for a test drive and see what that 131 horsepower feels like.